Sup Shredders, my name is Logan, aka Spiderhands, and welcome to an Spiderhands where today we have ourselves an album from an act named Korfian titled Digital Brutalism. And if we switch over to here, we have ourselves the YouTube upload. There's a playlist of these 7 tracks on this from Apathy start all the way through to Narita. This album is also available on Spotify and actually other digital stream platforms. But we're going to listen through this album's all 7 tracks from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Again, starting with Apathy Star, let's go, let's do it. What do we have? Solid polish there with the kicks.
Scroll through tragedy, I'm overexposed. I am a star of apathy. Millions of options lead me to no destination. Make me a star of analysis on my way to paralysis. Performing my routine, I am a flawless machine. I am a star of apathy. Connected on the line, but inhumanely secluded, make me a star of apathy.
You know the sound design is exquisite.
I am a star.
Fascinating. Written, produced by Korfian, mixed and mastered by Sweet Spot Productions in Athens, outfit by Project SR, headpiece by Katrine Landfire, new album Digital Brutalism, which we're listening through today, coming this year. Okay, so that was our first track. What do we think Apathy Star is about? I think it's about someone who is going through life apathetically or melancholically discussing, oh, I am a well-maintained machine that exists in this universe. I walk through the city and I have my headphones and I do my routine every day. I am a cog within the system. I scroll and almost like we've got analysis paralysis or something like that, and we're just left to be and to cope and seethe, but then to not to seethe, to just, it's an interesting reality that we're in. I think it's a really interesting vocal performance. It's kind of surreal in the delivery of it, but it makes a lot of sense when you consider the subject matter. It's very sort of deadpan. There are parts where occasionally we call out, but it's simply because we're trying to raise our volume so that we're heard. And in essence, I think it's just the expression is appropriate and we allow the music to most of the talking, to be fair. So the work on the mic is good and kind of is unique. And then we also have the quality of the studio production is incredible. The design of it, the way things are EQ'd and compressed, fleshed out around the stereo field, all the different tones and textures and timbres, the way they're dispersed throughout and placed, and the way they're felt. And it's just wonderful. There's a harshness to some of those sounds, but they still sound commercial grade. There's a polish that allows it to be palatable. And it's nice and loud without pumping, It does pump a little bit, but in a way that makes sense for the more, say, electronic feel to it. I think the sounds of the static, as well as on a final note, work really neatly for this. The kind of glitchy textures, almost like we're a machine that's malfunctioning, are nice steps. There's almost sort of like a cyberpunkish kind of synthwave sort of environment created with, again, the use of those sequences and hooks and melodies there, the bass line pumping along and the drums with a mixture of different rhythms. I think that the track suits the electronic ingredients, and I think that there aren't that many genres of music where a story like this would make sense. I feel like it's very sort of, it's got to be a little bit on the nose to have effect. And there's all these other like key and other bits of ear candy and little bits of adjustments almost to keep attention throughout the piece, even at 2 minutes 21, which is quite short for a track. But I feel like the amalgamation of the different layers is effective, makes sense for the atmosphere, the Phrygian mode, and some of the minor keys that we're basing this off of, and ultimately is a really interesting start to what appears to be a really promising album. But we have the self-titled track now, number 2, Digital Brutalism, so let's go, let's do it. More of the similar layers to the previous track. Very early 2010s EDM.
Function over form, algorithm over connection, systems crashing on and on, love to rejection and vice versa, orderly chaos of concrete, binary code to complex systems, the line between becomes distorted, you trust it only when you're consistent, oh when you're consistent. When you're consistent.
The sort of dubstepish feel with the synth and laser and clicky effects are a nice combination. It does sound very digital.
Function over form, algorithm over connection, systems crashing on and on, love to rejection and vice versa. Your heartbeat has become a screech as you take more than you can handle. Your vision's broken like a bleach. You're looping in an endless cycle. When you're consistent, when you're consistent. At least you try to be.
Interesting difference in feel here. With the vocal chops and the slow attack cat in the background. To not have any vocals here is an interesting choice as well. And having the strings fade out at the end is a nice touch. So I think Digital Brutalism, track number 2 here, is more suggesting how we are exposed to social media, how our heart's beat becomes a screech, how our lives become noise, and everything within it is something we're sort of meant to either withstand or feel like overexposed with. I like how it's following on from the previous track, Apathy Star, if I'm not mistaken. It does seem like we're going to have a consistent concept throughout this. I mean, it says underneath here, exploring the influence of social media and technology and identity and self-perception. I think it's just an interesting thing to talk about. It's been done in music before, but I like when we do slightly different takes on it. And I feel like it's almost quite a cool thing to sort of goes beyond the nose about it. I think one of the things that works well here is that Korfian, as a vocalist, knows when to not be there and when to be there. We're provided with enough context through the verses and choruses to be able to follow along with what the track is about and to be handheld a little bit. But outside of that, it's almost like we're getting told this information and left to it, almost to kind of get lost in the ether of the soundscape of the internet. And I think that sometimes, you can have a tendency to over-explain stuff, and we didn't have that here. There are some compelling melodies here that you can follow along to, and they're, kind of catchy in a kind of a quirky kind of way. But I think it's also being done sort of more, be a little bit sort of progressive, a little bit experimental, and also to make you think rather than just nod your head nonchalantly to it. I think another thing that works well with this track is, in addition to the previous one, it's the length of it. So with a concept like this, if the track was like 5 minutes, it might be a bit beleaguered, and you might become like a little bit kind of like, oh, I've heard this now, I understand it, no matter what you throw at me, we've had enough of the concept at this point. So I appreciate that the tracks are shorter to be a kind of almost bite-sized, despite the fact that they're still within that 2 to 4 minute sweet spot. There's enough fascinating stuff going on with like the synth and sort of drum beats and bass parts and the vocal chops and the pads, etc., to keep you going throughout and keep you engaged, but it also doesn't overstay its welcome, which I think is a smart move. You get the point of it without it being over-explained. And so then finally, I think it's also a testament to the production here that we have such intricacy with the actual way that the song has been produced and composed. It's the way that things sort of span out to the sides with a stereo field, how things kind of glitter and kind of glitch out in sequence, and the interesting mixture of a wide variety of different rhythms with the various sort of drum beats and the bass lines, and how you have these kind of sparkly synths. And it is such a full sounding, vibrant song to be able to appreciate and enjoy, and I adore it because you kind of need to be enveloped in this in order to appreciate or maybe relate to what they're discussing. If the music was more timid, it might seem like we're almost sort of exaggerating the affectation of it, but we don't have that here. It's smart. And we have easy to follow motifs, chord progressions, and bass lines that are decorated with all these fun, interesting ideas. And we have subtle shifts with things as we go along. Well, in this track anyways, a bit more blunt with the previous one. But I feel like there's a lot of polish to that from a songwriting perspective, and it's a good continuation of what we had before. So now we have track 348, 844. Let us continue.
My time is yours. Go ahead. Blessed by the code, I obey the design. The mass.
Great call and response there.
The soul is confined. Sedate my fear, mute my cries. You numb my pain and I keep you alive.
Unchangeable, unalterable, unmutable, unvariable, unversatile, unmoldable, unmovable.
Interesting modulation of the voice there.
Let us be thankful for we have come much. The more you buy, the more the happiness. But if you ever dream of something else, call 348-844 to confess.
Oh.
Unchangeable, unalterable, unmutable, unvariable, unversatile, unmoldable, unmovable.
That's an interesting resonance with the buzz there.
Go ahead.
Really just kind of push and pull with that part, isn't it? So that was sort of more of a completely different vibe within itself. 348844, the hotline to call if you start dreaming of something else aside from what the modern future recommends to you. There is an interesting sort of like inference here that people are lost in the void, and that there's like a machine talking back to the guy in a different sort of like range there, the vocal modulation. Because that's one of the, just before we go any further, that's one of the things I appreciate here, is that we're not just having our vocals delivered in a way where he can sing and he can speak, and I like hearing his voice, but it's also that we are having the machine's opinion or voice on it. It's just an interesting perspective we haven't necessarily had yet, and I like that we're continuing to introduce new concepts as we go through. So that's a plus, but it's sort of like, I think you get further on through the piece and you have this conversation between Korfian and the machine, and eventually that kind of it kind of comes in and you're just lost in the trance of being involved in that world, that galaxy there. And it's mesmerizing and it's gorgeous. And the bells that you hear in the part where the machine's talking kind of remind me of sort of like a thing you'd have in meditation or a trance thing, as well as a lot of the kind of the humming that you have here. There's, I think, a sense of weird sort of spiritualistic element within this, almost like it's a kind of technological religion or something like that that's being involved here. And I kind of like that we're using different instruments as well as vocal styles or samples or whatever in combination with the more sort of like modern electronic elements to create that bond there and to infer it without even necessarily needing to have the person tell us that or sing it to us. And the vocals are very gentle for the most part in this one. I like the fact that we're comfortable in a head or chest voice here and that we're melodic with a little bit of vibrato in there. But it's just that marriage of those two elements is great. And to just kind of mirror that feeling of going into that trance at the end, or that kind of output there, adds a different reason for why we have that part. It's almost like there was stuff in the second song that we didn't necessarily understand. In the third track, it is now sort of superimposed and more obvious. So ultimately just three really interesting concepts on their own that do tie together as well within the album. We've got Father.exe, track number 4. Really interesting sound design. It's
security into superiority, and you're disconnected from your own desire. So I neglected all my needs to satisfy them as they please. Counterfeiting the betraying my own fire, my impersonation of you taking control.
That harmony is menacing.
All the years I wasted trying to be the partner I will never be. I denied myself for everyone. I was trained to just compare, control, but when I let go of it all, I realized I had no power. You've been conditioned to compare yourself, but that was so unfair. You've been conditioned to compare yourself. Validation doesn't come from the outside. That's why I evaluate my worth based on some random people's thoughts. That's why I evaluate my worth based on some random people's thoughts. Counterfeiting the betraying my own fire, my impersonation of you taking control. But I can't take back. All the years I wasted
Great use of dynamic range there. See, there's little intriguing element. I've said intriguing a lot. Really exciting elements in the sub layers as well as the mains. There's a lot really cool stuff going on within these songs. So I think Father.exe is potentially discussing kind of maybe our conversation with a higher power, or looking at ourselves as a human being and just trying to figure out what we're actually doing. We have these mantras that are discussed about comparing ourselves to others and everything like that, almost like we've been conditioned to do so over the years. And I think at this halfway point of the album, maybe we are discovering that that is not a particularly healthy way to live. And it's an interesting turn from what we've had previously, which shows a journey through it. And I especially like that at an album, because to have a twist, it just makes the idea of an album worth having to me as a reviewer, because an album is meant to be an exploration, to me, as I understand it, of a broader concept. Granted, you can have like a variety box thing where you have all these different ideas that are separate and they're different styles, and it's just basically a show of what the musician has done in that period, or the next box of singles, etc. But I think that in a situation where you have these 7 tracks and they're tied together and they're cohesive, they follow on, it's really exciting. It's really cool. So I like the placement of it within the album. I think it's great. There's also fantastic use of dynamic range here. We're very gentle in those lower areas where it's like more sort of bass and drum specific. Some of the verses were a lot more minimalist than what we've had maybe compositionally or later on certain parts there. Even though there was like the modulated vocals that still return. And there's like little kind of synth kind of wah, and like keys and leads and sub elements and stuff like that, and little kind of components there that decorate. But I love the dynamic range that's shown when we go into our heavier kind of chorus elements, where again, we are sort of more calling out, and the music comes up with Korfian. And I just appreciate, there have been other parts of the track where there have been like subtle resonances of kind of the glitch or the kind of buzzy or distorted nature of stuff. That's very occasional here. You embrace the fullness of that tone in these upper registers, and it really does seem like we're trying to sort of get out of the place we're stuck in to go somewhere a little bit different, a bit more positive. And I like the vocal modulation, not like the chopping of it in certain parts and making like, just add more of an instrument as well and a bit more musical. But ultimately, yeah, the dynamic range is fantastic. And I suppose on a final note, it's the fact that we just really can sing. And I think that's cemented here. There is a moment of vulnerability that is put forward here in some of the softer parts where there's wonderful legato and vibrato sections from Korfian. And it just goes to show that they are capable of doing a lot of different styles of vocals. It's simply that they're allowing it to be sort of like, I suppose, drip-fed or spoon-fed, depending on how it suits the situation. I think, again, within a larger concept like an album, that is appropriate. I enjoy the fact that we are trying to do this here. I think that it is great to explore a full range here and not to show the listener everything at once. And it makes me genuinely curious about what the rest of the album is going to be like. But we got Your System, track number 5. Oh, up in the range? Upper range for that?
please consume me. From the darkness of my heart you cry, but you don't fool me. Please don't fool me. It's not over till it's over. Play with me. Know your days are numbered. In the end I'll wipe you from existence. Control me till
It's so harsh, but it retains musicality.
tiny little crack you sleep into. Consume me, please consume me. From the darkness of my heart you cry, but you don't fool me. Please don't fool me. Through a tiny little crack you sleep into. Consume me, please consume me. From the darkness of my heart you cry, but you don't fool me. Please don't fool me. It's not over till it's over.
Harmonica melodic minor.
Not over till it's over. It's not over till it's over. It's not over till it's over.
Really fascinating, that one. Because that was Your System, track number 5. Now, we talk about a rabbit hole here, getting stuck into it, consuming things, etc. I'm wondering if we're now trying to exit the place that we're in, but we're finding that we're falling down the rabbit hole and it's just a difficult niche to break out of. It's not over till it's over is basically sort of insinuating, no, we've gone too far now. Even if you're having second thoughts, you can't escape from this. It's just an interesting angle to go in that I feel does follow on previously from ways that I feel is appropriate. I think it was good to switch up the vocal modulation here to go to an upper range. It just shows we need to continue to add other angles to it, and maybe it infers an additional voice there. Maybe it's another character in this universe, or like just another sort of sound or texture timbre that we appreciate here. Either way, I think it's really good. But it's like, I hear this and I just think, okay, we are continuing to sort of mess around with sort of glitchy vocal textures as well and kind of chop them up to the end. And we have these interesting sort of harmonies with, harmonic or melodic minor. Some really curious scales. There's some others I don't necessarily know the tone of right now, but I like them. I like the fact that we're not just sticking with majors and minors there. We're messing around with different intervals and sort of like sequential choices. I think also it's the choice of those kind of clangy, kind of metallic tones at the start, and how they go from the left to the center and then to the right. The music has surrounds you in the headphones, and there's constant neat little decisions being made in post that allow the listener to kind of, or put you in a position where you're forced to follow it around and figure out where it's going next. Having that much enrichment within a track, so many things to sort of pay attention to. It almost makes you kind of feel a bit spoiled as a listener, but I appreciate that we can still keep the listener's attention on them as they tell the story whilst all the stuff is happening about it. It just creates a vibrant world to be in, even if it's a bit dystopian. And just to kind of have this really, because this is a louder track if I'm not mistaken than the previous few. We're clearly trying to break out at this point and it's a bit more bombastic. It's just the little things like that all kind of fade, like inside, which could be like sparks flying, or it could be people walking, you don't know. But to have the vocals in like that, and for things to just peter out like that, they could have just had the vocals have the reverb tail and then be done. No, they continue to have more stuff at the end. As a listener, it's like, why did they do that? Why are they creating this? Because everything's been so deliberate. I think you need to have an album which features those experiences, even if they're not particularly sort of like prominent. And it's just such an interesting start to proceedings as well, with the way the headphones are filled with these kind of glitching, oscillating elements there, with the upper register voice harmonies and stuff, that almost when you hear Korfian's voice, it's like, oh, we found an anchor, a point of where we can kind of follow along with things again. But it's just the universes that are put forward through here are really, I feel like I'm running out of adjectives, but we'll continue. We got Rolos, track number 6.
έρθεις κοντά μου. Ένα βήμα πίσω, μα δύο μπροστά. Ελευθέρωσέ με να σε διαλέξω πιο καθαρά. Πες τι νιώθεις όπως το νιώθεις. Δείξε μου ποιος είσαι πραγματικά. Δεν έχω άλλο χρόνο να ξεκλειδώσω κανένα πια. Προσπάθησα να γίνω ό,τι δεν είμαι, μα τα αποφάσισα πως ρόλος δεν θα είμαι. Τότε μ' αγάπησα κι ας είμαι ό,τι είμαι. Δίνω τον έλεγχο, τίποτα
It just slams with those kicks, eh?
περάσω εγώ από καμία δίκη. Δικιά μου ήταν μου, δικιά μου και αγάπησε με παρότι έχω. Μη ζητάς πιο πάνω από όσα μπορώ. Αν σε μένα ψάχνεις το όνειρό σου, δεν είμαι εγώ. Κοίτα εσένα πριν από
This is a lot easier to follow along with than the previous few tracks.
Μα δεν ξέρεις τι, τόλμα να ρωτήσεις αν θες να πάρεις απάντηση. Προσπάθησα να γίνω ό,τι δεν είμαι, μα τα αποφάσισα πως ρόλος δεν θα είμαι. Τότε μ' αγάπησα κι ας είμαι ό,τι είμαι. Δίνω τον έλεγχο, τίποτα δεν μου ανήκει. Δεν θα περάσω εγώ από καμία δίκη. Δικιά μου ήταν μου, δικιά μου και
So that was, if I'm not mistaken, Rolos. Track number 6 for today. So I'm not sure what the song was about as I'm not as familiar with the language, which is totally fine. I think one of the things I want to sort of discuss is the fact that it sounds pretty and really easy to listen to even without knowing the language. I think that if you can sing well, and if you can sing these melodies and any harmonies that are applicable with sublayers and stuff like that in a way that suits the motif, I think that you've got yourself a track that'll land regardless. I think it's just great sort of like delivery of the vocals. And a very sort of like warm and caring and gentle, and just a great sort of like coloration to it as well, in a way it sort of was a wonderful warm glow in a track where there were a lot of sort of like more kind of like cold concrete layers was really effective. I think in addition to that, it's the fact that this track was a bit more straightforward than other songs we've had, and so it shows that we can not only make the more experimental sort of like pseudo avant-garde stuff, we can just simply make bangers outside of that. It was maybe consistent to a point where it became predictable after a while, but I think having more of a single in an album can be really positive because it allows people to know, hey, even if this is a bit much, you know that they can do both. And so it's great. And they're like, and if, as a final note, I think like having the kind of, oh, those kind of modulated vocals from before being more of a synth instrument was just an interesting call and response or additional layer to the vocals that we had in certain sections there. Having a melodic motif or a picked motif that can be carried across 3.5 minutes is quite impressive without it becoming dull. I think part of that was because the bass line changed as we went along. I think as a through composed piece, practically, it works. I think if you understood the language, you'd get more utility out of it. But either way, I just think it's a nice sort of palate cleanser before we finish the album, aside from the final track there. So ultimately, well done. Like, don't get me wrong, it's just before we finish it, don't get me wrong, it's not the same the entire time. There are some builds and there's use of dynamic range and some rises in space there and some pauses there. It's just that we have a reliable motif that we go back to when we need to, and it's rigorous in its delivery, and I appreciate that. And it's represented by different instruments at some points that we don't just have to pick part the entire time, but it's that kind of bass line and harmony as well. That's the thing that's continued. So it's good work. We've got Narita, track number 7. How will we finish today? Video game synths. Is this going to be instrumental? Okay, that was the final track for today, Narita, off of the Digital Brutalism album. So this track was, I think, more of an outro, maybe just a way of finishing the album on an instrumental note. There are no vocals here, and I suppose that's something I want to sort of discuss, is that I think having an instrumental track within an album is solid. Sure, if we can tell a story, if we can sing, if we can speak, if we can modulate and have different layers and do that stuff, that's great. Don't get me wrong. It's also good to be able to allow the instruments to have some time by themselves, which granted, we did have that throughout this album. It's just this was an entire session of that. So I feel like the different lead elements, the kind of whistly sounds here, the exquisite alternate percussion, that kind of clashy, kind of glitchy sounds, that kind of the tappy sounds there, but a kind of grittiness to them. In addition to the more sort of like straightforward sort of kick, snare, and sort of cymbal samples there, the kind of squarish, kind of fuzzy bass that we had near the end. There's like a mixture of these experimental layers in addition to more sort of like expected contemporary ones, which are quite sort of, it's just a really fun fusion of different sounds, and it's almost like a credit sequence for the album, if that makes sense. There are occasional risers and stuff as well to kind of bring us between sections, but it's more so like a vibe or an atmosphere, quote unquote, that we're trying to initiate here. And ultimately, I think it was not only the choice of the instruments and having an instrument as an outro that was a smart idea. The way they were composed and illustrated was harkening back to previous parts of the album to tie it all together. It's also the fact that it's like a minute 36. It's like we're aware that even if it's a really cool sounding instrumental with some sort of development, songwriting, composition, production wise, that we're not overstaying our welcome with it. I think at this point we've maybe discussed what we wanted to sort of say within this album, and maybe it just seemed a little bit too blunt to have it on the previous track there, where things were a bit more sort of conservative within the way that we structured and put things forward. So we kind of wanted to remind the listener maybe of what we'd done beforehand to tie it out. And I think just having a minute and a half of that gives you that kind of palate cleanser. You finish off the album, you have the tippy taps to finish off. There's a natural sort of like lowering of the bell curve near the end in terms of overall intensity. And ultimately, it's just a stellar outro. So ultimately, I'm really happy with this track as well as the rest, but we're going to talk about this album more in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of this album from an act named Korfian titled Digital Brutalism. Now, this album, what is it about? I think this album is about someone, the expression, the description is put on the album art, exploring the influence of social media and technology on identity and self-perception. You have the idea of consumption and trying to break free of it and sort of giving your free will to it and kind of being, there's almost like a spiritual religious element to the first track, I think, Star or Apathy, or was it Digital Brutal, or 3844 or Father. There are elements throughout this album where it's implied heavily that this is it's like a technological religion, so to speak, and that we're just getting sort of lost in the rabbit hole of it all. And it's an interesting direction to go on with this. I feel like it's valid more than ever in this day and age, and it's not like that's a hot take, but I think that more music needs to discuss it to remind people that it's not actually normal that we're so dependent on technology. At least in my opinion, I suppose I find myself getting stuck in devices, and I can sort of relate to a lot of what's being discussed here. And I think a lot of people will be able to. And I think music like this is important, not just because of that, but also in part due to the fact that it's the way that Korfian communicates here. Now, a lot of it is in English. I appreciate the vocal performance, and some of it is spoken. Like Star Apathy is very sort of balanced. We call out at some point, but it's very kind of restrained, and it's almost like as we go through the track, we open ourselves up like a new flower spread. We're sort of finding ourselves, and I think near the end, we're singing, and it's so beautiful with our head and chest voice, the vibrato legato passages here. It's almost like we become more expressive as we go on. We realize we're not just this organism that's designed to be in a routine to do what we need to do without thinking about it and just to absorb and sort of soak up and sponge things. We are meant for more than that, and I think that is what we go through here. Korfian not only communicates well and sings well and speaks well, and there's bits of vocal modulation, additional layers put in, including lower and upper octave bits, which are quite cool, maybe to be the voice of the machine or something like that. But we end the track with an outro instrumental, sort of insinuating that I think Korfian might have just found what they wanted. And I dig that a lot. I think that's really cool. So yeah, very competent on the microphone, easy to listen to. I think following on from that, it's an album where we hear it and it kind of infuses a sense of kind of the expected electronic elements instrumentally, like lots of different synth layers and sort of basses and kicks and risers and everything from there's mixtures of electro house and more experimental stuff and dubstep kind of drums and everything like that, and lots of cool ideas. But it also, what it does, which is really neat, is it includes a lot of sort of glitchy kind of alternative layers and points of dissonance within it, with some digital buzzing and some kind of voice glitches as well. We chop the vocals up and do all sorts of interesting stuff there. So it's not just trying to do the whole future dystopian kind of everything is cyberpunk kind of thing. It's trying to do the thing where it tries to present the expected quote-unquote vibe, was to also making it sound like things are falling apart and we as human beings are losing ourselves within it. And there's some points where it's gorgeous, but you can tell it's kind of tainted by the inference that we don't have a choice about it. And a lot of the music does communicate certain elements of this without the Korfian meaning to sort of sing or say anything. And I like the fact that we're doing that. I think that it's smart. The tracks are also nice and short, which helps, but there's just a wonderful array of instruments that perform a lot of different individual functions I've spoken about in each of the sort of mini conclusions. Effectively, it's a track where typically things are minor oriented and clearly people are not having a good time, but I think that it's done in a very mature, measured way. And it's testament to their skill as a composer and producer that they're able to not only get their vocals to sit with everything, but that there is sometimes so much chaos and sometimes so little that they can manage to infuse everything in between in a way where it's both meaningful and well written, with a variety of different rhythmic devices added. There's phenomenal dynamic range to things. We're acutely aware of the space there and how to use sort of drama within our songwriting to make things more interesting. The chord progressions, harmonies, sequences, arpeggios, etc. are done well, and we stack the frequency spectrum really well as well. And so I think finally, after the sort of the general comments on the composition, without going sort of too in depth with it, it's basically the studio production that I want to sort of talk about as a final note here. It's exemplary. I struggle to find a single thing that I would personally want to change about this, even if I was being really sort of pedantic about it. It's mixed and mastered in a way where it's something that I think a lot of other producers could probably have a listen to and learn from. And that sounds like a strong statement, but if you think about it, a lot of the sound design decisions with how things are panned in a stereo field, a lot of the individual effects chains and design choices on the individual elements are just really neat. Things that distinct needs to follow along to in the mix. There are clear layers and sub leads and sub leads, and the way things are EQ'd without any weird resonances, but sometimes with deliberate resonances as well, which is that extra bit further. We're not just knowing how to polish something, we're knowing how to give it a personality and attitude, and it makes it more unique when you hear things like that. And we have tracks with different feels that are still sound like they're a part of the same album. We can go between tracks like 1 through 5, and then to Rolos, which is far more sort of like easy to follow and I say this in the best possible way, like more sort of like contemporary, like mainstream, I suppose. And we managed to sort of go between those and have a similar feel where things are nice and loud without pumping, because the bus compression limiting is handled. Ultimately, it sounds like a commercial grade album from musicians who clearly knows what they're doing. I appreciate the concept. I think the vocals and the production with composition and instruments and the studio production were all well executed, and I think it's just a really interesting idea that was implemented really well. So thank you for watching my review of this album from an act named Korfian, titled Digital Brutalism, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via their various social medias and their YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support all your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as need the help more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.